Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome back to another discussion video today where I'm going to be tackling something that I think is an important topic and something that I see coming up a lot, which is the cost of this hobby. Anytime I do one of these discussion videos, there's always somebody who complains that everything is too expensive, regardless of whether or not it's actually relevant to the topic. It does seem to be the one thing that some people like to hammer home all the time. And in some ways it gets a bit frustrating because often it detracts from the actual real matter at hand. Equally though, I do appreciate where those comments are coming from. So today I'm attempting to tackle this topic head on because realistically there's only so much I can say in a comment reply without it becoming just a wall of text. I do have a lot to say on this topic. There are valid arguments and frustrations there, but also I don't think it's quite a clear-cut case as many people think it is. So I do think it's going to be worth taking the time to properly dive into this today. So stay tuned, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get started though, this video has very kindly been sponsored by Derails, more about them later on. And don't forget, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, especially if you do like these discussion videos. They seem to be really popular. I've done a fair few of them now, so yeah, click that subscribe button down below and come and join our little model railway community. Right, with that said, let's crack open this can of worms and get started. The first thing that I want to address is when people talk about the hobby being too expensive, 9 times out of 10 they're specifically talking about new ready-to-run locos or rolling stock. There are other parts of the hobby that are expensive too, but generally this is what most people seem to be complaining about. And to cut right to the chase from the start, yes, this hobby is expensive. I'm not going to deny it. But obviously, whether it's too expensive is a subjective thing. 10 to 15 years ago, people complained when new models first broke the £100 barrier. Now, if a brand new model cost £100, I think most of us would be pretty happy with that. So your perspectives do shift over time, and I'm sure there have been people who have been complaining about the prices for decades. Now, I imagine at this point someone is probably eagerly pointing at an inflation calculator going, ah yes, but new models today cost a lot more than they previously did, even when you adjust for inflation. And my reaction to that is, of course they do. You can't compare a model from the 80s or the 90s and say that that's the same as a brand new model made today. The level of detail and the complexity is just so much more advanced than even models from the 2000s or up to the early 2010s. They don't really hold up favorably anymore. And that's before you get into all the extra features we have now, like DCC compatibility, speakers that are pre-fitted, lighting, and not just a single light circuit, but different functions that you can turn on and off. Working fans, firebox flickers, stay alives, even steam generators in some cases. All features that the manufacturers are including because we as consumers want more and more for our models. Put a loco from the 90s next to one released last week and even when adjusted for inflation, yes, of course the modern day model is going to cost more. I mean, that's simple common sense, surely. The other thing to acknowledge as well is the cost of manufacturing a new product too. Most models are made in China, and now Chinese workers are wanting fairer pay for the skilled work that they do. And it is skilled work, by the way. I don't think many of us would be able to build something like this. This is the other thing that some people bring up is, why don't we just bring all the production back to the UK? It'll be much cheaper, it keeps it all in our country, shorter waiting times, etc., etc. And honestly, we just don't have the infrastructure for it. Even if we did, the first thing on the list would not be the manufacturing of model trains, but also we just don't have skilled enough people who would want to work for the same rates. And that's also ignoring the cost of building the factories, shipping the tooling back over here. It's a bit of a minefield. And yeah, I see why some people do use this as an argument. It's just not a realistic one, at least in my opinion anyway. If it was, then when brand new companies like Accurascale or Rapido were first starting out in the UK, well, why did they automatically go down the route of Chinese production too? It's because right now it's still the most logical option. Out of all the major model manufacturers in the hobby, it's really only Daypol and Pico who do produce stuff here in the UK. Pico's stuff is obviously revolves around track, which is kind of a different area, to be honest. And yes, Daypol do produce a lot of their wagons and rolling stock here in the UK, and that is to definitely be applauded. But I think we can all agree that a Daypole wagon isn't really on the same level as, say, an Acura scale wagon. The cost is certainly lower, but, in the same way, so is the level of detail. And of course, when Daypole do have their high fidelity models, I'm thinking of things like the Hawthorne Leslie or the D-Class, for example, both of those were manufactured in China, again suggesting that it's not feasible or profitable to do it here in the UK. Yeah, I appreciate it's a bit of a minefield and there's no simple answer here, but I think it is good to address some of the logistics behind model making in the modern day. But all of that aside, there's also a more personal way that we can look at this too. While we've delved into some of the reasons why new models cost so much, there is one really big thing to remind ourselves of. This hobby is very much a luxury and not a necessity. Some people can come across very entitled when they talk about how much new models cost, as if it's a right and something that we all need, when that really isn't the case. None of us need a model railway, and even if you have a layout, you don't need absolutely every loco that hits the market. Many of us have more locos in our collection than our layouts can accommodate anyway, so adding another to the fleet isn't an absolute essential. I do feel like this is perhaps where more realistic modelers have a slight advantage here over more casual modelers. If you only model, for example, the Northeastern Railway, well, a new SECR loco is a lot easier to resist since it doesn't fit in with your interests. But with a Rule 1 modeler who buys locos because they like the look of them, that's going to be harder to avoid. But the point is, model railways are something we spend our disposable income on. It's not a basic or a necessity, and yeah, while we may wish our models were cheaper, you spend what you can afford. If you can't afford a new model, yeah, that sucks, but it's not the end of the world. I do think we're also relatively lucky in the UK in comparison to European and American models, where locos cost considerably more. I was looking at the HO Flying Scotsman the other day, made by, I think it's Marklin, and the discounted price for that at the retailers is £526. Now, to be fair, that does include DCC sound and also steam effects as well. But Hornby also have a Flying Scotsman model with a steam generator and sound too, and that costs £287. I mean, that's not far off half the price. And yes, I know this is a single example, but it does show how much more expensive things could be. We have, of course, seen lots of price increases in the last few years in the UK. Not just for model railways, of course. Everything is a lot more expensive now, and as a result, people do have less money to spend on their hobbies. While we've seen the price of new locos run through the £200 mark, and in some cases beyond £300, it does feel like things have stabilised a little bit over the past 12 months. I do hope that comment isn't going to come back to bite me. Touch wood, they'll stay there for a while at least. But yeah, the most important thing to say is that if you are frustrated about how much a model costs, just don't buy it. And I don't say this to sound flippant, I say it from the perspective of vote with your wallet. If enough people are saying that the model looks great but it's too expensive, the manufacturers will take notice. And we've seen this in the past where a model is released and doesn't sell well because it's priced too high. Eventually it gets discounted until they do find a point where people are willing to pay for it. Realistically, leaving a snarky comment on YouTube or a forum about how the manufacturers are ripping everyone off, well, that does absolutely nothing. But if the majority of people really do genuinely feel this way and feel strongly about it too, the simple thing is to show the manufacturers and retailers by not buying these expensive models. Before we get to the rest of the video, I do just want to say a big thank you to D-Rails for sponsoring this video today. Obviously, they've been long-time supporters of the channel, and many of you guys know I personally use them all the time. In all the years I've been using them, the overwhelming feeling I've got is that D-Rails really do genuinely care about their customers. One of the things I think that encapsulates this the most is their free postage. You can get free delivery on any order as long as it's over £20, which, yeah, okay, in the world of things like Amazon Prime, it doesn't seem like that special initially, but I don't know of any other model shops that offer free delivery to this extent. With most other retailers, you have to spend well over £100 before you get free postage. And of course, with Derails, you're getting top-notch service too. So next time you're planning to get some bits and pieces for your layout, or perhaps that new loco that you've had your eye on, well, head over to derails.co.uk or click the link that's down in the description. And in the meantime, thank you so much again to Derails for sponsoring this video. One area I do understand is people being concerned that the hobby is too expensive for newcomers, kids and beginners who we should be encouraging to join the hobby, but may well be put off by the high prices that brand new locos demand. And yeah, again, I get where people are coming from with this, but while there are expensive models out there, we also have much more reasonable models available too. Yeah, they don't have all the bells and whistles of the premium models, but I don't think a beginner is likely to be looking at purchasing something like the Rapido Sterling single right out of the gate. It may be something they aspire to and would like to get someday once they're a bit more established in the hobby. But realistically, most people, even kids, understand that it's better to start off at the cheaper end of the spectrum first. Most of us started out with a circular track and a slightly unrealistic loco rocketing around at breakneck speeds. And hobby get a lot of flack, but they actually do a lot of work to support newcomers with things like their railroad range and their various train sets. You know, the models are more durable, the prices are considerably lower, and there's a decent range to choose from too. Even some of their main range models, like the upcoming J15, for example, at £125, that isn't too bad. And of course, there's also TT120 as well, which has been popular with newcomers because of the way Hornby have launched that range. I've done a whole video on that in the past, so I won't go into all that again, but you can, I'm sure there's a link down in the description if you do want to have a look at that. And it's not just Hornby too. Look at Oxford Rail. The J27 is a fantastic model. Great detail, runs really well, and you could pick those up at the retailers for under £100. And yeah, it doesn't have things like a firebox LED or a pre-fitted speaker, but it's good enough for when you're just getting started. You know, you don't buy a Ferrari as your first car, you go for something more realistic. And yes, some models are expensive, but there's a spectrum. Just because there are beginners coming into the hobby, it doesn't mean those premium models shouldn't exist at all. And I think the newcomers are smart enough to know that they aren't necessarily the target audience for those premium models. Perhaps though, the key is to highlight the budget-friendly models more and more so that those who do enter the hobby aren't immediately put off by these prices. There is another thing to consider, especially nowadays, is that social media can give you unrealistic expectations. If you go on forums or follow various content creators, it can seem like everyone is always getting new locos all the time, when in reality, that actually isn't the case. You're seeing that one person has got a new model, and then the next week a completely different person has got another model, and then the same the following week with somebody else. It gives you this false sense that everyone has a bigger collection than you, and you feel like you're missing out. There are, of course, some people out there who really do buy a lot of models, and there is potentially an argument there about the examples that we set. But equally, it's their money, and they're more than welcome to spend it on their hobby if they want to. Just don't let it make you feel inadequate in comparison because you're not buying as much as them. There is also the point of view that you don't actually need a huge collection of models. In fact, I think there's a lot of people in the hobby who are perfectly happy with all of the locos they've got and don't feel like they need any more. But I also think we're reaching a point where many modelers are becoming more selective about what locos they have anyway. And yes, part of that is because the prices have risen, but with all the new features that we expect from our new models nowadays, I think there's a large percentage of people who would rather have one spectacular model than several that are okay. In that instance, for those people, it's worth paying that higher price because they're more selective about what they buy. This is especially true if you've got something like a shunting layout. All you really need for that is a single loco and a few wagons. Maybe a second loco if you want to change things up every so often, but any more than that is overkill, really. Yes, you're more than welcome to go out and buy more shunting locos if you want to, but you don't need more locos, is my point. You can absolutely still enjoy running your layout with what you've already got in that instance. So maybe what we should all be doing is setting ourselves slightly more realistic expectations. Yes, I get it. It's exciting when a new model is announced, but how many of us actually really genuinely need it? If you want it and you've got the money to spend on it, then absolutely go for it. But if you are conscious about the cost, then yeah, it's nice, but you can still participate in the hobby with what you've already got. So far, I've only really covered brand new, ready-to-run models, as that's mostly where the argument seems to be focused. But it also has to be said that building a layout can be expensive too, although the crucial word there is can. From the majority of my builds, I've discovered that the most costly part tends to be both the wood to make your baseboard or getting a kit of some sort, and then the track, specifically points. Although having the right tools can be a problem as well. I did find earlier on that there are lots of little bits and pieces that you need to accumulate for different jobs. And yeah, while individually things like tweezers or static grass applicators don't have to be expensive, they do all stack up. However, the scenic side of things can be done for fairly cheap. And a lot of modelers like to use DIY techniques like using paper mache for making hills, or even things like making your own flock and scenic materials. Even if you do decide to buy things like static grass or ballast, individual containers aren't really too expensive in comparison to models at least, and you do tend to get quite a bit out of them, depending on how big your layout is, of course. There are tons of ways to model on a more realistic budget, and in many ways this can actually make your layout more interesting, but also look better too. For example, you can go out and buy a ready-made building that you can just plonk down on your layout, and it'll look great. But it's the same building that everyone else has on their layout. Or, alternatively, you can scratch build one yourself for a lot cheaper and end up with something unique to your own layout and requirements. Yeah, it's going to take a bit more work, but that's part of the fun, right? You do have to be realistic about what you build though. If you're on a fairly tight budget, then a perfect replica of King's Cross Station might be a little bit out of reach. But like I mentioned earlier on, a shunting layout with 1 or 2 locos that fits in a small space is a lot more achievable. It'll still provide plenty of operational interest, and there's nothing to say that you can't extend it in the future should time, space and funds allow. You also don't necessarily need to have your own layout. You could join a club and get involved with building and operating layouts there. Yes, you still pay a membership fee of course, but per year that's probably still going to be cheaper than building your own layout. You can also attend exhibitions to appreciate and enjoy others' work and keep up to date with the hobby in general. And don't forget, social media has really exploded massively in the hobby in the last few years. You can watch all of my videos for free and see the process of me building a layout step by step, or tune into my live streams just to see trains running on the layout and hang out in real time. Yes, I know it's not the same as having your own layout, but if you don't have the funds, there are still lots of other ways to engage in the hobby. I'm not denying that the hobby is expensive. It is. But honestly, so are all hobbies. These are things that we do in our spare time with our disposable income. And if you don't have disposable income, then probably having a model railway isn't your biggest priority, at least at this moment in time. But it does seem to me that the vast majority of people who do get worked up regularly about this are complaining out of moral outrage. It's not that they actually want to buy the model that's just been announced for whatever price. It's that they want to be the one to take a stand and say, this is too expensive. Like I said earlier, if you find something too expensive, then don't buy it. Vote with your wallet. And if you weren't intending to buy it in the first place, then why does it matter to you? Complaining on behalf of others that a model is too expensive when there are lots of other more affordable options available seems a bit silly to me. And yet, the sad thing is that none of this will make any difference. None of anything I've said here will change anything. The next time a model is released, there will still be people complaining that it's too expensive. The next time I review a model, there will inevitably be a comment stating that it's far too much to pay. And it's hard because I get it, but I worry that now it's reached a point where it's just become background noise, and therefore it won't be taken seriously if in the future a manufacturer does release a model at a significantly higher price point. As always, my advice is simply to enjoy the hobby to the best of your ability. You don't need the biggest layout with the largest loco collection to have fun. There are so many ways to enjoy this hobby, and hyperfixating on the cost doesn't help you or anyone else. That's not to say you should ignore it completely, but there are other ways around it. So enjoy your hobby rather than focusing on the negatives, and with that, I think that's where we'll leave it for today. Hopefully some of you have found this video interesting and informative. If you have, then maybe give the video a quick thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!